Welcome to the 2017 Elevate Pharmacy Virtual Summit. I'm your host, Blair Thielemeyer of Pharmapreneur Academy. Today, I'm speaking with Alan Barrett. Brendan is a top sales producer that's generated millions of dollars in revenue. He runs his own sales organization and also works with small business owners to help them provide coaching and consulting to increase their sales. I've asked him to come here to help us improve our relationship building and our sales skills. Brendan, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So when we talked before, we talked about consulting in physicians' offices, and you're used to working with civil engineers.
Yes.
Which, is still kind of somewhat professional industry, but as pharmacists, we need to know how to approach physicians and approach other people to form these collaborative business relationships. So I gave you a little bit of background on what it would look like for a pharmacist to go into a physician's office and create a relationship with them, mostly with the office managers. So we talked first about identifying your target. And we talked about office managers versus physicians or nurse practitioners. So can you tell us a little bit about what it would look like first to just cold call an office manager and explain your services and request that you do an in-person meeting?
Well, with that right there, that can be pretty intimidating if you're not somebody who's used to knocking on doors, who's used to dialing for dollars, as it's called. Cold calling, kind of has a negative connotation to it. Right. I know this is going back years now. I remember when I first got into sales and my sales manager's telling me, yeah, you just go knock on doors and you call people up and you have a conversation with them. And it's just like, well, it can't be that simple. I don't like receiving unsolicited calls. I remember, my parents just hanging up the phone on telemarketers around the dinner table. But what I've come to learn, over years of selling different types of things to different types of people, is we all are just people and we all are just having conversations. And unless you call somebody or run into them, in real life or show up at their office, you can't enter into a sales conversation. Now, in a lot of ways, it is a numbers game. And so there is going to be a degree of rejection that you just kind of have to let roll off your back. But at the same time, if you're genuine with people, when you engage with them over the phone as to who you are, what you want to do, what you want to accomplish with talking with them, is it to set a meeting with that person? Is it to speak with their boss so you can set a meeting with that person? If you just lower the bar and set that expectation that you're just two people having a conversation, and sometimes you get what you're looking for and sometimes you have to call the next person, you'll find a lot more success, and you'll find it a lot easier just to relate with people, because in reality, that's all you're trying to do is converse with another human being.
Absolutely. And, definitely setting realistic expectations is something you want to do before you start that conversation. And I think that, as pharmacists, we're not used to reaching out to people who don't know us. We're not used to putting ourselves out there. But just for me, it was kind of realizing like what's really the worst that could happen. And rejection isn't really all that bad. I hate to say it, but you kind of get used to it as an entrepreneur. But, it's just something that comes with the territory. And if you look at it as, I just want to have a conversation with you. I just want to tell you a little bit about what I do and maybe how I can help you. Then your expectation shouldn't be let's have a sit down, sign a contract meeting tomorrow. And, I think that is definitely helpful for a lot of pharmacists to realize that this may take some time and this may take some repeated follow-up.
Yeah, there's two important things there. One that will help, if you've never sold yourself or your services or anything period before, calling some stranger on the phone can be nerve-wracking. You're stepping on your own, you're mumbling your words, you're chewing on rocks, if you will. And, first, the worst thing that can happen is if you're calling somebody on the phone, they could just hang up and you move on. The world doesn't end. Chances are they'll forget you and you can call them next week and give it a second shot or in just a couple of days. But then the other expectation as to what you're trying to accomplish when you make first contact with somebody, it's not to get ink on a contract. In a service consulting profession, you don't know what to sell somebody until you've gone through a discovery phase, part of your sales process, part of understanding who the client is, where your value and your service meets what they need, and then creating a working relationship based on that common ground. That first contact is just that. It's first contact. It is not the time to sell and close the deal. It is an opportunity to get to the next conversation, really. It's just enough to, if you're calling an office manager and it's the physician that you really need to speak with, you may need to present to the office manager just enough for them to say, okay, this is a legitimate person to schedule a meeting with the physician. And then you start to really enter the discovery phase once you've sat down or once you're in front of the physician. So trying to sell somebody, all you're selling is an opportunity to continue the conversation when you're cold calling. So, just by lowering the bar, lowering that expectation of, well, I'm calling random people on the phone or I'm showing up in random offices, throughout the day. It is not my goal to sell people during that activity. It is my goal to open doors, to open opportunities to have sales conversations after we've gone through a discovery phase. So you're still a couple steps away, so
right. Pump the brakes.
Bad things that happen. You're not even to the opportunity that you can lose yet when you're making those first nerve-wracking phone calls or cold calls.
Yeah, I think, and what I talk to a lot of my clients about, you're going to make this first contact with the office manager. The goal is what you call the discovery phase, is to schedule an in-person meeting where you can go in and, maybe instead of pitching all your services, you just do an educational in-service. And that's something that I think a lot of pharmacists would feel more comfortable doing, is teaching and educating as a way of, marketing themselves. So what I recommend is going in and maybe doing a presentation on MTM and how pharmacists can help patients with their medications. And, pharmacists need to understand quality measures that the physicians are dealing with. And so maybe doing a short presentation on how a pharmacist could impact quality measures in a physician's office. That should be, like you said, that should be your goal of a cold call. And then with that next discovery phase, you can go in, talk about your services. A great hint that one of my friends shared with me, he's a consultant pharmacist, and he says he likes to go in with a mutual patient in mind, so that you can talk about a mutual patient. I have a concern with this person. This is how I'd like to help this person. And then this is how I can help your other patients as well. And so going in and just getting your foot in the door to have that first initial meeting, you can discover what they need and identify their pain points and tailor your services a bit to exactly what it is they need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you can find common ground and you can find a way to offer, your prospective client a free win, in a single conversation or a perceived win in their mind, if you can walk into that conversation and, your the goal of that meeting is brainstorming solutions for a particular client they're having trouble with, and you can just offer that as an industry peer. That's a great way to build rapport and build your credibility and understanding, as far as the physician is concerned or the pharmacist is concerned, of just how much you know on this topic you say you're an expert on.
Right.
And from there, once they start to know, like, and trust you, they may come at you with questions as to, well, all that's great, but I don't have time. It's going to, that sounds relatively simple, but I know once I get into the weeds, it's going to be a lot more complex. It sounds like you've been there before and can do it a lot more efficiently than I can. What would something like that look like? And those are some of the most successful sales conversations or discovery phases that I've ever had, is sharing wins or creating wins in that meeting for the prospective client, or sharing the wins of other people that you've worked with to help generate ideas for these folks as to how they can operate better in their own business, their own practice. But of course, as they dive deeper down that rabbit hole to understand what it's going to take to create those efficiencies, to provide that value to their patients, they're likely to understand that they don't have the time in the day to do it as well as maybe you could have. And maybe they could pay you to add that benefit to their practice.
Yeah, and I talk to clinical pharmacists that, work in physicians' office, work in collaboration and collaborative practice agreements with physicians. And a lot of them tell me that they end up doing something completely different than what they expected to go in on. One of the consultants that I'm interviewing for this summit, she actually went into the physician's office telling them that she could help them save money by doing MTM for their chronic care patients. What the physician really got sold on was to her doing their refill authorization request and their prior authorization requests. And she said he gets out the door at 5:00 every evening, and he feels like her services are invaluable because he really values his time more than he does saving money or, increasing revenue. So I thought that was really interesting that she went in thinking that, I'm going to do this, but as an entrepreneur, sometimes you have to pivot your services based on what it is your client needs.
And that's something you might only learn, you're only going to be able to learn with repetition. If you're entering a new industry or you're going to be selling something for the first time, I'm always a big proponent of cold calling in person. It's not as efficient as cold calling on the phone because, if I sit down for 8 hours of prospecting, I could make, 4 hours of prospecting, I could make 80 calls in that time. I'm not going to talk to 80 people. I'm going to leave a lot of voicemails, but I can have 80 touches. Whereas if I'm driving about town, it's going to take me 10 minutes to get to each office unless there's, in this case, physicians right next to each other that I could potentially work with, or, a pharmacy right across the street from a grocery store with a pharmacy and then a Target down the way. That could be relatively efficient, but at the same time, it's not going to be as efficient as standing in one spot and dialing the phone. But that face-to-face interaction gives you real-time feedback. It gives you an opportunity to, it removes the possibility that they're just going to hang up the phone when you mumble your words or start chewing rocks because you're not well rehearsed in what you're trying to communicate yet. But that feedback will help refine your pitch, your elevator pitch. It'll help you to understand what words work, what words are landing. Even if you're not getting a verbal response, you can see on their face whether or not, I'm using the right terminology to convey the value that they desperately need, but don't understand that I have to offer just yet. And sometimes, you can make adjustments on the fly based on that nonverbal feedback, which then you can roll into more efficient prospecting on the phone and then roll into more efficient prospecting via email or other marketing avenues that you might want to explore as your practice evolves. But it all starts with getting the repetition and finding out what vocabulary and what terminology and what communication styles get across to your prospective clients the value that they need to see to engage in a sales conversation. And again, there might be things about your practice that are especially sexy that open up a lot of doors, and maybe only 5% of the people you end up serving will actually need those things. But through getting the repetition in conveying your message, pitching your service in that elevator scenario, you'll learn that, hey, this opens the door. And then from there, we can explore the ways that I can really dial into what they need. And that's what your discovery phase does. But that's a step beyond prospecting.
Right. So the first time we talked about, follow-up being key. So say you do have to make phone calls in order to schedule these appointments, to be able to go in and speak with the office manager. A lot of pharmacists will say, well, I left a voicemail and no one ever called me back. And so what you asked me was, how often are you recommending that they follow up? And I kind of said, well, I don't know, maybe every couple of weeks. And you said that was not enough.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're selling yourself, when you're selling a service, you're the only one that cares whether or not a transaction gets made until you've gotten through a sales process, and then maybe people are begging you to serve them. And that's only in an ideal situation. So people are busy, not that they're rude, not that they just, want you to take a flying leap off a cliff. They've got other things going on. And, with the saturation of marketing messages and sales messages and social media and emails and TV and everything else, one phone call, even if it's the best elevator pitch in the world, one voicemail is not going to get somebody's attention in most cases. There are exceptions to the rule, of course. But if I leave a voicemail, I am not waiting for that person to respond to me. I'm going to give them a day or two to get back to me, but I'm going to follow up. I may even allude to my follow-up in a voicemail or with a phone conversation. If I get in touch with an office manager and they agree to give me their email, information, I'm going to send up a follow-up email with more information. So yes, they've heard it. Now they're going to be able to read it. Now they can share it with the physician. But even on that first contact, I'm going to send all of those things because I want something to stick with them, something to help them process or metabolize the information that I'm trying to convey to them. But I'm not putting my eggs in that basket. As a salesperson, as a sales professional, I've learned that, you have to take responsibility for moving the ball down the court. And to do that, you need to follow up. Sometimes it takes 5, 6, 7 phone calls just to realize that you've been trying to make contact with the wrong person. Sometimes it takes 5, 6, 7 phone calls for you to get past the office manager. Just that persistence alone, it's not a very obvious clue, but it's more subconscious of, this guy has a legitimate message. He wouldn't be calling me back so frequently or with such regularity if he was some fly-by-night operation. I'm going to give him a second to tell me what he has to say and make a legitimate decision. A lot of people say, yeah, we're not interested, and hang up the phone because that's what they're trained to say. Or they're trained to not pass you along to the physician because they get 50 calls a day. But if you keep following up every time you make contact with a gatekeeper, an office manager, or even decision maker, you can get information from those brief, several second conversations, names, situations in the office that you can then keep notes on and use in your next conversation. Maybe the next time you call, or every time you call, you talk to a different person in that office. Maybe they've got 3 receptionists. Well, yeah, a couple of days I called and I spoke with Alice, and 2 days ago he said Jim would get back to me, and he didn't. So I'm following up to see if he ever got the message. And when you start dropping names, all of a sudden you're not a salesperson anymore. You're somebody the office does business with, and it's going to start moving you closer to a legitimate sales conversation rather than just continuing to run up against that same brick wall in your prospecting process.
Absolutely. I think there's 3 important points there that you made. One is, don't attribute a non-response to a no when it could be attributed to busyness. I think Tim Ferriss always says that, don't take it personally when the reason that they're not responding could just be that they're too busy. So always give people the benefit of the doubt with that. And I think it's also, the second point you made was allude to when you're going to follow up. I think that's really important, and it's something that I would appreciate as someone, if they called me and left me a voicemail, that they don't leave the next step to me, that they, let me know I'll be calling you back again, so that whenever I see that number pop up on my phone, I'm not, as inclined to send it to voicemail because I don't know who it is. So if you give me a specific time and date that you're going to be calling from South Carolina, I'm going to be a lot more likely to answer that phone call because I know who it is and know what to expect. And then the third point was getting details on names and, inserting yourself into that community that first I talked to Kathy, and then she gave me Jennifer's name, and now I'm speaking with you because Jennifer said that you would be the best person to talk with. So can I come in and schedule an appointment to speak with you? So I think that those 3 points were very, very important for people to take note of.
Yeah, it's crazy how effective the repetition is. You learn more, but your prospects learn more too. They get to know you, they get to recognize you. I know when I was first getting into sales and marketing, there was a lot of talk of the rule of 7. Sometimes you have to send the same message to somebody 7 times before it even registers on their radar, because there's so much other clutter, until they start to recognize a pattern. It's all just white noise. But if you're being persistent, if you're following up regularly, and when I say regularly, 2-3 follow-up calls in a single week is not too many,
Right.
And as so if people are waiting weeks between their follow-up, maybe the first is by phone and email, or just by phone, and the second time they actually get somebody on the phone and they're not really interested, but they'll give an email address so you can follow up with more information so they can think about it. A couple of days later, hey, wanted to see how what you thought of the information I sent over for you, now that you have a better understanding. I have some availability next week. I could stop in your office at this time. Does that work in your schedule? Rather than, can we set a meeting? Be presumptive. Assume that they want to set a meeting and that they're going to have time in the schedule, rather than giving them an opportunity to, again, reject you. It's not overly complicated, but with repetition, you learn these very very nuanced aspects of just conversing with people. It's a different setting than probably a lot of first-time business owners are familiar with, and so it takes time to be comfortable with it themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, pharmacists are trained to do, is not ask yes or no questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you said that, I thought back to my training. You don't ever want to ask a patient, did you take your medicine like you're supposed to? Yes.
Yes.
It doesn't tell me anything. But, whenever making those calls, I think it's really important to have a framework. So the first time you call, your goal is to just get names, to introduce yourself, to get an email address so that you can send them more information. Then you send the email. Then the second call, follow up. What did you think of the information I sent you via email? And then the goal of that call would be to create an in-person meeting. Like you said, would this availability next week work for you? What time would be best for you next week that
Yeah,
I'm
I've
going
got
to
time on Wednesday and Thursday next week. Which day works best for you? That's not a yes or no question.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
either or. And that usually work. It would take them 2 mental steps to say no to you,
Right.
rather than the one that they want to take. But yeah, it's repetition and having a plan and a defined sales process that you practice, just like the scientific method. If you continue to follow the same steps, you're going to get data and start to understand what's working and what's not. And then you can tweak and test different things. And so having a process is certainly going to be helpful in your prospecting, in your sales, in providing service to your clientele. But it starts with activity. You have to knock that first domino over. You have to start following up with people. You're never going to knock down a tree or knock down that first domino by chopping off all of the branches. You need to be consistent in one spot and chopping down or chopping at the tree's trunk for it to fall over. If you 5 whacks in one spot is more likely to knock over a tree than 5 whacks randomly around the tree. You're going to have hurt the tree, but it's not going to fall over.
Right. Focused action.
Focused intensity over time. Come on, that's how you build momentum, and that's how you learn your process, and that's how you learn what's going to be most successful in selling your services. And over time, you're going to be a lot more efficient with it. And that's probably the light at the end of the tunnel that's important to remember, is that, yeah, when you're learning something for the first time, it stinks. It's grueling. There's setbacks. But as you learn, as you perfect the skill, as you develop an ability, you're going to be that much more efficient with every ounce of effort that you put forward towards those activities. And if you're going to be a solopreneur for a period of time or build a business of, many people, a large team, over time, you're going to be consumed with other activities because you've generated so much business that now you have to fulfill. So if you dread calling strangers on the phone and you dread walking into random offices and trying to develop relationships out of thin air, it's a means to an end. Eventually, you'll develop more efficient ways to do the same types of work, and you'll be able to focus more on work you really like, like providing the consult to physicians, to pharmacists, to help them better care for their patients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, 2 things there are very important, that, you do get feedback as an entrepreneur. You figure out what does not work, but really, the only thing lost is time. So, you can say, well, they said no to me, or you can say, well, all I really lost was a few hours of my time. But then when you do get that yes, and you do get that first client, you can leverage it to meet other clients. And so, we talked before about asking your existing clients for referrals, and that creates sort of a snowball effect. And, hopefully at some point you'll have more work than you actually can handle, and that would be the goal, because then you get to hire other people and then you have a consulting firm.
Well, it's a snowball. It's momentum. As you become more efficient, as you start to work with more people, as you start to understand the word tracks and the messaging that works, that gets people to, perk their ears and start listening to what you have to say, and then understand the value that you bring to the table. And you're developing relationships and rapport with clientele, or even people who maybe you're not a right fit for, but you've built up that rapport. They may have colleagues in the industry that you can then help. And, it's a simple question of, who else do you know that maybe I should be talking to? Or do you partner with other pharmacists? Or if there are pharmacists, what physicians send scripts to you to be fulfilled? Then when you call the front desk at the physician, you say, yeah, I was just in this pharmacist's office. We were talking about these things. He thought, what I had to say is something that might be of interest to you. I want to see if you had time next Tuesday, either in the morning or the afternoon, which is better for you. And, that's a very efficient way to, alleviate, if you're a 7-8 touch prospecting process to get to a first meeting that may have eliminated 3 or 4 phone calls. Yeah. You still may have to go back and forth to actually set a date that sticks and then actually get in front of them. But, that's a huge efficiency. You've added, even if that pharmacist never becomes a client, you dropping their name in the prospecting process catapulted you forward, on your trajectory to a first meeting and then to a discovery phase and to, actually signing that physician as a client. So again, the little nuances that you pick up and that help you become more efficient and build that snowball, and eventually your business grows from that.
Yeah, I think that, that's definitely something that we could all do. We all, we may not have personal connections with physicians in our local practice areas, but we almost all have a local pharmacy network that we can leverage. And if you call an independent pharmacy owner, they're going to be able to tell you probably which physicians you don't stand a chance going and prospecting to, and which ones, are the ones that are interested in, really caring for their patients and, helping them get the best care possible and setting up community services and things like that. So I think that's a great point that,
yeah.
Even if you want to work with physicians, maybe you could start with pharmacies and ask them, who should I go prospect to first?
Yeah, I mean, tapping into existing networks is smart marketing. That's smart sales. Medicine has been around a lot longer than any of us, a lot longer than your business. There are social networks that exist, even before social media. That's not what I'm talking about, but networks of people that exist, people that know, like, and trust each other. And if you can tap into that, you're going to accelerate your progress. You're not going to have to start from scratch. You're not going to have to reinvent the wheel every time. And a lot of folks may be hesitant to give you a straightforward referral, but if you're prospecting to a pharmacist and you can serve both pharmacists and physicians by simply asking that pharmacist, is there a group of physicians or practices that regularly send you scripts or send you more scripts than anybody else? There's 2, 3, 4 names that you, out of maybe 100 that they could ultimately connect you with over a period of time, that now you can go prospect. And you can just say you were in that office. You don't have to say this guy, told me to come talk to you. You can say, this is who I was talking to. This is what we talked about. He mentioned that you guys work with each other very regularly. I figured I'd stop by, give you a similar explanation of who I am, what I do. And, figured since you guys work with all of the same patients, that there might be value that I could bring to your practice as well. And, you're 3 steps along in your prospecting process of maybe typically 8 calls. So, I would stay away from, or I wouldn't put a ton of weight on a pharmacist or a physician telling you somebody else is a waste of time, because they're not salespeople either. They don't have, or regularly active prospectors as business owners themselves. They may have just as little or less sales experience and marketing experience as you do. So for them to be afraid of sales conversations and prospecting conversations is pretty common. But if this is something that's going to be, a key in getting your practice off the ground, I wouldn't put a ton of weight in people telling you, yeah, that's going to be a hard stone to turn. Go turn over the stone. Figure out if there's a relationship that could be had over there before you give up on it. Names are names, and you're already 2 steps ahead of the game if you've got a name and some way to relate to them in your first touch.
Thank you. I think that that's a very valuable point as well, and absolutely wonderful advice. So I really appreciate you being here with us today and sharing all your experience with sales. I hope that, we've given attendees of this summit a lot of information that they can take home and, use in their sales processes tomorrow. So if there's some pharmacists or businesses out there that would like to get in touch with you about, increasing their sales IQ, so to speak, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, my website is Start in Phoenix, so it's Start in PHX, like the airport abbreviation.com. That's always a great place to start. Folks can email me directly at brendan@brendanbarrett.com. That's my personally branded site. And if folks are looking for help to kind of level up their prospecting game or their sales game as a whole, or they're just getting started, or they're really frustrated with one aspect or another, I'm working to build a free mini course. And folks can, again, it's just a landing page right now. I'm looking for feedback to make sure that we dial in kind of a discovery phase like we've discussed, dial in on exactly what type of course content is going to bring folks value and quick wins as they grow or start their businesses. And folks can get more information on that at startinphoenix.com/closebiggersales.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And I'll add all those links and also Brendan's contact information in his speaker bio on the site. So you'll be able to find it on the speaker page under Brendan's bio. So Brendan, thank you so much for being with us here on the summit today. You've provided a ton of great value for attendees, and we really appreciate your insight into the sales and marketing process.
Well, thanks for having me, and it was a pleasure to talk with you again.